All right. Well, it is 10 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you being here. My name is Ann Wysant. I am the new outreach coordinator for 19 Services, and I'm really happy to be part of the team and being able to engage with you all and provide some opportunity for information sharing and networking. And Haida, I'm sure everybody knows you, but if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Great to see. I know we don't see everybody's faces. If you want to put your face on, we'd be happy to see them. But it's so great to see your guys' names and participation. Hello, Mr. Jacob. It's great to see you all, and thanks for hopping on with us today. I'm going to share the screen here in just a minute. We put a couple reminders over in the chat box. Feel free to use the chat box with questions throughout. You can unmute, raise your hand. We're happy to stop, chit chat, answer questions along the way. And yeah, I put a couple of other reminders in there about the presentation, certificate, and can talk a little bit about our new YouTube channel, but I put the link in the chat too, as well as the date and time for our next session. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch over, get the screen shared, and then I'll let Ann take it away.
Thanks, Haida. Yes, so we are really excited that we have launched a new YouTube channel. We recognize that it's sometimes hard to commit yourself to a dedicated time for something like this. So we wanted to figure out a way to still encourage folks to join us in person because this is not just a training opportunity. As you've seen, we've lengthened this by an additional 30 minutes because our hope is to also make this a networking opportunity. So we will leave some time at the end so that folks can share exciting and innovative things they're doing. Maybe there are examples related to whatever the topic is of what we're talking about this day that you want to share with others. So again, we hope this becomes much more interactive. And obviously, a YouTube video doesn't allow for that. So while we do have the YouTube channel set up where folks can go back and maybe review something, or if there's someone who couldn't participate that really should hear what we talked about, you can send them to that space. But we are only able to offer training certificates for folks who join us in person. So there won't be any training certificates available for anyone who reviews the recording on our YouTube channel. But we hope that that is a benefit to you all in being able to share the information within your organizations, or potentially, hop on a day that you're not able to join us. You can hop into that YouTube channel and take a look at what you missed. So we hope that you find that useful and helpful. So today we're going to talk a little bit about internal compliance programs. And I'm sure that most of you within your organizations have developed an internal compliance process. And while internal compliance really is about meeting the requirements of the rule, we all know that rules really only outline minimum compliance. Like, this is what you've got to do to pass the class, right? And not within rules, we don't see embedded those outcomes that really are indicators of quality. And so it really is this system of internal compliance that allows you to have continuous quality improvement within your systems. And so we want to talk a little bit about that today. We believe that having a program that truly enhances services and shapes your customer's experience leads to systems change within your organization. It leads to sustainability of those changes, and it improves the outcomes not only for the people that are receiving your services, but it often also improves outcomes for your staff, your direct support professionals, your frontline supervisors, by just creating a better environment, a more rich environment, and culture within your organization. Go ahead, hide it to the next one. So let's start with the rule. So why do we have to worry about internal compliance? Well, because it is in the rule. All Medicaid providers must follow the laws, rules, and regulations that apply to them. And internal compliance is a way to help you manage that load, because as we all know, it's not just what's in the DODD rules, right? Though the DODD rule is what we're focused on. If you are going to have a successful system of internal compliance, it really is ensuring that you are looking at all of those rules that are applicable to you. So as a DODD provider, you are also a Medicaid provider. And so there are certain rules that apply to you strictly because you're a Medicaid provider. You're not going to find those in the DODD rules. And so again, the DODD rule around internal compliance really focuses on things that are embedded within the DODD rules. It's best practice as an agency to really look at, as you're developing that system of internal compliance, what other rules apply to us. And it might be as simple as you're operating a day program, and because you are a business in your village or your city or your town, there are requirements for, some type of a inspection by your local fire department or your city engineer or the county, zoning people or whatever, right? Are you also ensuring, as part of your system of internal compliance, that you are really looking at all of those rules that apply to you, and you have a system in place for, maintaining compliance, meeting timelines, making changes as issues are identified? So best practice is broadening this to really look at your system as a whole. What is unique to you based on where you operate, under what different state and federal organizations you are operating, and does our system not only look at what the DODD rules apply, but does it also look at all those other rules that apply to us? And do we have a system for ensuring compliance with all of them? So DODD has embedded the requirement for a system of internal compliance based on their rules into Administrative Code 5123 2-08. And they've identified within the rule the requirements that are specific to DODD internal compliance. So a lot of it is based upon your policies and procedures. And the rules that are the policies and procedures that are listed in the rule are not all inclusive. So even though there is a list of policies and procedures that we're going to talk about today that the rule requires be part of your system of internal compliance, again, as I talked about, there are other policies and procedures that you're going to want to make sure that we have embedded within our system. For example, other than background checks, it doesn't really go into detail in the rule about other types of HR policies and procedures. And so, again, having that good system in place is going to challenge you to look at all of your systems and say, okay, we've met the requirement that's in the rule for these policies and procedures. Are there other policies and procedures that dictate how we operate, that have an effect on not only the people we serve and their families, but also on our direct support professionals, so that we are ensuring that those policies and procedures are driving our system, are driving our work at all levels? I had to go ahead. And so in the rule, it really talks about kind of four pillars of a system of internal compliance. And we're going to talk about those four pillars, and they're listed here. So the first one is demonstrating that the agency provider has that system of internal compliance that addresses the requirements for provider certification, background checks, service delivery, and individual funds. Those are the four that are outlined and highlighted in the rule. The first thing I think of when I'm like, where's MUI? Like, that's so important, right? But it's not outlined in this rule. But we all know if we go to the MUI rule, there's a requirement for a policy and procedure. And so, again, making sure that we're capturing all of that in that system of internal compliance and saying, hey, these things, again, aren't specifically listed, but they are so vital and important to what we do. We want to make sure that we're managing them within this system of internal compliance. Next one. And then one of the things that I don't think gets talked about a lot when we talk about internal compliance, and that is when an agency provider has a board of directors, whether you call it, I don't know, traditional board of directors or whatever terminology you use, right? If there is some group of people that is somehow overseeing the operations of the agency, they're working in conjunction with your DOO, but they ultimately are the decision-making entity for that organization. It's vital that they are included in your organization systems. And a lot of times, coming from the department, having worked in compliance, having worked in provider support, what we would find is with a provider who was struggling, maybe they had a poor outcome on a compliance review, maybe they were really struggling with staffing issues, whatever it was, oftentimes the board of directors was not aware of those issues. And generally your board of directors are brought upon into the organization based upon their area of expertise. So you may have a lawyer who's part of your board of directors. You may have a certified public accountant, a CPA, who's in your board of directors. Maybe you have a family member that's in your on your board of directors, right? Oftentimes, their expertise is something that can be very beneficial to helping the organization address any challenges that they might be dealing with. So cutting them off and not having them involved in a system of communication and problem solving is sometimes an issue where you're not accessing resources that are readily available to you. Um, so when there is a board of directors, the board of directors needs to be ensuring the fiscal integrity of the agency. So there should be a process by which there are regular audits that look at not only the billing and reimbursement that the agency is getting and ensuring that that cash flow is adequate to continue services, keep services going, keep people employed, but also looking at individual funds and how those are being managed. They are asked to review and evaluate all compliance reviews. So again, I can't tell you how many times in my career at the department, we would have a situation where maybe a provider just is really struggling. Maybe they're going into a suspension of admission sanction or something like that. And as we at the department were following up, we come to find out that no one ever informed the board of directors that there was even an ongoing issue or that they were working through this issue with the department. They also are required to monitor the effectiveness of the agency's internal compliance program. So again, as you are building this program, what your system of internal compliance looks like, it's vital that you are engaging with your board of directors if you have a board of directors, and then promote the delivery of high quality services. Again, the intent of the rule is to really ensure that those people that are leading the organization, those people that are collaborating and working side by side with your director of operations, are all kind of on the same page, that the goal for everyone is this delivery of high quality services and ensuring that decisions made that affect the operations of the organization are done so in a way that promotes the quality of services. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the four pillars of internal compliance. And I have to give all credit to Haida for this graphic on here. I think it was a couple of sessions, even before I started working at 19 Services. I sat in on some of the Network 19 sessions, and Haida talked a lot about kind of building this base, building this almost like building a house, right? Building a foundation that leads your organization to be successful. And so I thought about that, and I thought about, the system of internal compliance really is all about that. It is maintaining that foundation. It's maintaining that oversight and the roof of the organization, and it's having strong pillars that keep that organization solid. And so that kind of led me to developing this graphic. So if you look at the graphic, you will see that, the roof really is representative of oversight and monitoring. It is about having that system internally where you have a ongoing and daily dedication to identifying, solving, and rectifying issues and problems. But not only that, there's also the positive side of that, which is identifying and recognizing those successes. So a good system of internal compliance isn't always built on challenges and struggles and fixing problems. It should also be built upon identifying and knowing, and sharing out and duplicating those successes that are going on within your organization. Obviously, the four pillars, that's what's holding that roof up. That's what's kind of keeping everything between the oversight and monitoring and your policies and procedures strong. And those four pillars are consistent with what's in rule, including having your system of compliance look at provider certification practices, background checks, service delivery, and individual funds. And then the steps represent that foundation. So the foundation of your system, not only your system of internal compliance, but your service delivery system really is the development and implementation of policies and procedures and ensuring that your staff, the people that you support, and family members and guardians are familiar with those policies and procedures. So, as a direct support professional, I really do need to understand, why am I being asked to do what I do? Do I understand the purpose of my work? Do I understand the expectations? And do I understand what action I should take if I identify an issue related to one of those policies or one of those procedures? What if I identify that something just doesn't work anymore? That's the way we used to do it, but man, times are changing. Now we have technology that helps us do it, and we do it differently, but the policy hasn't been updated. So again, having that foundation where families, individuals, the people that are providing services, your frontline supervisors, all have that ability to make recommendations, review policies, be part of policy development and reviewing. Does your organization include other people outside of your leadership in developing, reviewing, and modifying policies and procedures? So all of that put together really builds a very strong organization. Sorry about that. My puppy decided to say hello. So if you can hear him, I apologize. So let's talk about provider certification. And I know I heard all those silent uggs when I said provider certification. And so I get it. I get that that process can be somewhat daunting, but you can control what you can control within your organization. So first of all, you are required to have a policy around provider certification. And so that's looking at Rule 5123-208 and all the requirements in that rule, and really setting out and laying out a policy on how you're going to meet those requirements. You really need to address not only the initial certification, which is kind of a one-time thing, right? But then ongoing. What are the processes we need to have in place to ensure that we're maintaining our certification. What are the processes we need to have in place so that we are ready and prepared for renewal? For instance, it's very important for whoever the person is that's responsible for your certification to be aware of your certification end date, your span dates, so that there is a process in place to ensure that, am I getting that 90-day notice from the department that my renewal is coming up? Again, my experience with the department before I left was that in efforts to kind of manage the workload in provider certification, there were times when certification span dates would be modified. Generally, they were being pushed out. So you were maybe getting an extra 6 months added to your certification because they knew that in July they were going to have a large abundance of recertifications coming due. So in order to manage that workload, they would take you from a July 1st renewal date and push you out to a December 1st renewal date. But they didn't tell you. They just went into the system and did it. And so if you don't have someone that is aware that July 1st was supposed to be our renewal date, therefore we should have gotten a notice of upcoming renewal in April, and we didn't, what's going on? Then you're only going to realize this by happenstance. So again, making sure that you are addressing after initial certification, what does our ongoing process look like? How are we prepared and ready for renewals? Within provider certification is also all of the staff training requirements. And when we say staff, we really are, the rule really is referring not only to your direct support professionals, but all level of staff within your organization. And so if you are familiar with the provider cert rule, you know there are a couple of appendixes that apply to staff in different positions, and it outlines what the training requirements are. So that's from the DOO down to supervisory staff, frontline supervisors, and then your DSPs and also your DSP assistants now. So it's really important that, again, as you're developing policies around staff training, what does that look like, not only when they're initially hired, but also those ongoing annual requirements? And keep in mind that you can broaden this. Again, the rule is minimum compliance. So minimum compliance are those staff training requirements that are found in rule. But as an organization, you may say, look, this is something that's very unique to us. We want to make sure that our staff are trained on the process for requesting a van for community integration activities, right? So you can add to those staff training requirements, but they have to at least meet those minimum requirements in rule, and they have to be at all levels of staff within your organization. And then also maintaining accurate information. This is vital. You are not going to get updates and notices and information from the Department of Medicaid, and others unless you maintain your demographic information within both the PNM system and the PSM system. So, ensuring that within your system of internal compliance, you've identified a responsible person for that, the frequency at which they're going to review that, and then who's going to be responsible for making those updates.
Hey, Ann, I'm just going to hop in here for a second and
Please,
just
absolutely.
kind of put in a couple points here. So under the certification piece, this can have that unfortunate trickle down effect if you don't have that updated information in PNM or PSM, including that most accurate email address, because that is where for compliance reviews as well as certification notifications, that's where they're going to go. So it can become an unfortunate trickle down effect in several different areas if the email address or primary contact information, especially if it's changed for your agency. But one thing to just kind of point out is, if you get up to that point, you've gotten your 90-day notice and you're not sure that you got it, there's 2 points here I kind of want to make. First off, you guys can check your certification dates within that kind of initial screen, if you will, when you log into PNM. So when you're going into the portal through, it's kind of, I call, yeah, the Department of Medicaid portal, I call it the purple screens. Once you get there, you can see your dates. That is really important because you can check yourself, right? Like you can self-check during COVID. I know Ann talked about dates. There's dates that have changed. So you may have thought it was this, but it's been pushed or changed. So your dates are sitting there, and that's something you can go check. And that'll help you be like, oh, okay, we're coming close, or oh, we don't have it. You know, that's not for another 6 months or a year. So that's kind of one piece. The other piece is if you get to that point where you're at your 90-day notice and you're coming up like this is your end date, you once that expires, you won't be able to bill for services. So if you hit that expiration date, basically like that next whatever that next day is, you cannot push up billing. And so we just want to make sure like that's, we always recommend for providers when you get that 90-day notice, especially with how, as Ann said, we kind of all have a sigh when we talk about certification. We thank them for all of their work. But it can be delayed. So when you get that 90-day notice, we recommend let's get working on it. Let's get this in as soon as possible because we've also seen here recently lots of questions coming back regarding things that have been uploaded. So wanting to make sure we kind of get ahead of that before we get too far outside of that window. We've got all kinds of little pieces and parts that we can add in if you're in that place of recertification. But anyway, I'll stop talking there. I just kind of wanted to add in a few other things regarding the certification piece. So.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and again, I know that sometimes it can be really challenging to figure out where do I need to make the changes. So I know that staff at 19 Services are very familiar with that. They can help you out with that. The department also has a team of staff that's their primary job is provider support. So you can also reach out to the provider support specialist at the department for your county, and they can also help you with that as well, because I know that not all of the systems talk to each other the way we would assume that they would. And so I know a lot of times, again, when I go back to my experience, providers would reach out to me and say, but I made the change in the provider management or the PNM system. Why didn't it automatically transfer over to the PSM system? Or I made the change in PSM, etc. So if you run into that, please don't hesitate to reach out to Haida or someone at 19 Services, or again, one of the provider support specialists at the department who are available to help you. So the next pillar that's required under the rule is the background check. So that rule again requires a policy. I'm just going to tell you, I keep getting a little pop-up on my screen that says my internet connection is unstable. If someone would just let me know if I cut out or something so I can figure out how to fix that. I think we're okay now, but just in case, I wanted to let you guys know what's going on. So again, that policy is driven by the requirements that are found in Ohio Administrative Code 5123-202. And the three main parts of that are meeting your timelines, and that's both initial timelines and ongoing timelines. So again, those initial timelines require the initiation of your employee or your applicant's background checks prior to hire. Also the completion of the attestation statements, and then making sure that your system ensures that you get that back within 60 days, and that there's a way that if you don't have it back on day 61, you are taking some action, right? To remove that person, following up to find out where it is, what's going on, why don't we have it, so that on day 61, the person is no longer providing direct support until you get that And then ongoing, managing enrollment in wrap back, in ARCs, making sure that, again, you have someone who's identified as the person who's monitoring that and taking action if there's a hit in any of those registry checks or those background check systems. And then also making sure that background checks are done accurately. And that really, really goes back to, are you initiating and doing ongoing background checks utilizing the correct reason code based upon, is it a DOO? Is it a DSP? What is that reason code? Some of you may have agencies that are, working within multiple systems. And so, again, making sure that if you have folks who are cross-trained to work in those multiple systems, that you're utilizing the correct reason code for them in their duties as a DODD employee, but then also maybe you're doing home health. And so maybe that's a different reason code through the Department of Aging or passport waivers or whatever. So again, making sure you have someone and a process in place for ensuring that accuracy. And then driver's abstracts. Again, it's timeliness and the accuracy of those, and making sure that those are getting done initially and ongoing. And by ongoing, again, it's not just the frequency by which you need to redo them. It's what's the system for people who are driving within your organization to report if they have points added. Are they getting to that 6 point mark, which then, is going to cause us to have to evaluate the position and what they're doing and whether or not they can continue to drive.
I'm going to pause here for a second. And there's a question in the chat from Cody. And I'm going to just kind of circle back to a few things, just kind of like some little tidbits here. So
Absolutely.
under the BCI part of it, BCI FBI, if you hang out with us a bit, we usually recommend that you put a date that you received your BCI, because as some of you know, right, that BCI might have a date on it because it was done maybe a few weeks ago, and did it get sent out on time by the Attorney General's office? Like there's so many pieces and parts that especially come with mail. So we always recommend that you put that date that the BCI was received at the office, because then that's going to move into ensuring that the BCI was enrolled in a wrap back within the 14 days. And so sometimes that can become a hiccup. And so utilizing that received date on the BCI is super helpful. I will say this too, if you are looking at a wrap sheet, so you've got the BCI and it came back with a wrap sheet, when you turn your primary page over to look at the first part of the wrap sheet, it'll tell you the person's name and all that information. In the top right corner, the Attorney General's office has changed this over the past few months. It has a date printed, and that date will be different 9 times out of 10 than the date that's on the primary cover sheet of the BCI. So something that we've kind of started looking at is maybe putting a highlight to that date, because that's actually the date the BCI was ran. And if you have a BCI receipt, right, where you sent the staff to go get it or they sent you their receipt back, those two dates tend to correspond. So just a little tidbit there on the wrap sheet part of it. There's way more right to say on wrap sheets and all those things, but I'll save that for another time. And then two, with the driver's abstracts, again, this is stuff. If you have questions or need help on these things, we're more than happy to help you. So with the driver's abstracts, especially when the BMV changed the website, this has been almost a year or two now. It seems like it's kind of corrected itself. Is that we would see BMV ran, but it was actually the license plate or your registration renewal. And again, you guys know I'm a visual person, so when I look at it, usually when you see that, you see a little picture of the license plate and you see vehicles. And then you see the license plate number. That means that you've ran their registration and not their BMV that's showing their driving record. So again, if you have questions about that, we're more than happy to answer that. But as I said, more, this has kind of rectified itself now as the website's been used a little bit more here in the last year or two. So, okay.
So do we want to get to the questions in chat? We've got a couple.
Yeah.
So Cody and Haida, jump in, please, because I will say I'm probably a little more removed or have been a little bit more removed from this process than you guys have. But my understanding, revalidation, as you know, is a Medicaid process. And so that is tied to your provider agreement to be a Medicaid provider. And so it is a completely separate system or process. It's not tied to DODD in any way. And my understanding is generally that's a once every 5 year revalidation that you are a Medicaid provider, that you intend to continue to be, that your information is up to date, all that kind of stuff. And then the
Mhm.
certification end date is directly aligned and tied to your ability to provide home and community-based waiver services through the DODD waiver programs. And that is tied directly to DODD. It's assigned by DODD. The one way those two things do cross is that you won't have an active certification if you don't have an active Medicaid provider agreement. So if you don't revalidate with the Department of Medicaid, then you're not going to be able to maintain or get certification to provide DODD services. And the end dates or the term for certification is a 3 year span. So they differ in the entities that oversee them and um, um, have the process for doing them. They differ in the length of time, but they are connected in that you can't have certification without the Medicaid provider agreement.
Mhm.
I hope that
Yeah.
answered the question.
He said thank you. Yes.
Great, great. And then Patrick asked, do the steps and processes for an internal compliance system need to be formalized in a comprehensive written document? Right now, they have all these covered, but they're covered in different places. So there is nothing in rule that requires it to be a singular document. I would say best practice is to have some policy, to have something that says, this is what our system of internal compliance looks like. Here's who's responsible. Here are the things that we cover, like provider cert, background checks, service delivery. And you can find details about provider cert in our policy, our HR policies. You can find details about background checks in our HR policy, service delivery, and maybe route people through that main document to where those specific policies and procedures are. But here's what I want to do to definitely share with you. And this is just kind of the insight from, again, being a person who has done regulatory work at the state level as well as provider certification work or provider support work. And that is that generally a citation around internal compliance, if you look at the review tool and you look at the guidance that's in there, it's really supposed to be issued when you go into an organization and there are multiple citations and you really can determine that those citations are a result of not having good policies and procedures, not having a system in place to, follow the provider cert rule, to follow background check rule. It really isn't supposed to be based on a reviewer coming in and saying, oh, let me see your internal system of compliance. I've always said to people, it's not tangible, right? It's not something that you can touch. It is the system as a whole for that organization. And are they identifying areas of concern? Do they have a system in place once they do that self-review to correct those areas of concern? And then are they truly changing their system once they identify the problem, put a new process in place, and then implement that new process so that it really does result in a change. That is, in a perfect world, the way that everybody should be looking at internal compliance. I can guarantee you that not everybody looks at it that way, and that some people feel like if you don't have something written, if it's not where I can see it, touch it, and feel it, then you don't have it. So, best practice recommendation is to absolutely develop a internal compliance policy, and then if you want to, let that policy drive the reader to your other existing policies and procedures that are housed in other places. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in here too and say that we do typically look for internal compliance policies mainly because of what Anna is mentioning. They tend to be part of or a result of a citation regarding not following the internal compliance program at your agency. So what I would say, Patrick, is we can chat a little bit more, Patrick, and kind of look through that for your agency. So, all
Agreed.
right.
And I think it is very organizational specific. Haida's recommendation is great. Like, if you have questions about this, if you need support around this, if you're like, man, we'd really like somebody to come in and see and just take a look at what we already have and maybe give us some recommendations. Absolutely reach out to Haida and her team. And I'm sure that is something that they can provide some support with. Delivery then. This is probably the biggest and most widely covered area of internal compliance. So when I say things like, the first thing that jumped out at me is that there's not a health and safety MUI type of pillar, right? And I think the reason for that is because it really can fit under service delivery. And so this is very broad. I think it's very um, important for you as an organization to really have a broad lens at how you look at policies and procedures around service delivery. This is absolutely more than reading the ISP and implementing the services. It is much broader than that. So first of all, there is a general requirement for a policy around service delivery that's found in 5123-209. So you can take a look at that and see what it says, but you also have to keep in mind that the requirements and expectations for service delivery are also service specific. So when you look at 5123-209, that section, again, there is within suitability, the rule for suitability of services and those, there are some generalizations about service delivery. You really need to dive into the rules for each service that you are providing and look at what are the qualifications for that service. How do we make sure that we are qualified and continue to be qualified for that service? What are the training requirements for that service? And so under provider cert, where we talk about training, are we ensuring that our training is also service specific? So just keep that in mind in the service delivery section, that you're not only generalizing your system of service delivery, but you are also specializing it down to the specifics for each of the services that you are providing. One of the most important, in my opinion, parts of the service delivery, sorry, yeah, thank you. Um, in the service delivery area is service satisfaction. How are you looking at the satisfaction of, obviously, the people that you are supporting, but then also the people that are important to them, their families, maybe their guardian, whoever, is really important to them. Are they satisfied with what their loved one, what their friend, what the person that they're guardian for is getting? And then also your direct support professionals. What is the reaction of the person to the services that they're getting? And it's so vitally important to ensure that you are surveying and asking for feedback from your direct support professionals professionals because they are often the ones who are catching just those little clues that, maybe somebody doesn't feel comfortable sitting down with a supervisor or a manager, even if all good intentions. I'm like, I'm going to go meet with all the people we serve and ask them what they like and what they don't like about our services. People may not feel comfortable if I'm an agency manager or some leadership position in the agency to be very honest with me about during a meal with their direct support professional. They might actually say, I really hate that in order to, go on an activity, we have to put in a request 3 days in advance. I'd like to just be able to get up and go tomorrow if I want to go somewhere. Like, they may not share that with you, but they share it with their direct support professional. So how are you including all of those people that are part of your service delivery system into that satisfaction or that feedback process? Um, Documentation, I said, to me, service satisfaction is the most important. I know that as a business, documentation and billing probably is vitally important as to you all as service satisfaction is to me, because that's what keeps your system going. That is what allows you to continue to provide those services. So ensuring that your documentation by service type has all the required elements. Again, that goes back to that idea of being service specific, because as you guys all know, the documentation requirements differ from service to service. Also, looking at individual outcomes, what and how do we document those outcomes for people? I know I'm old school. I've been in this field for 35 plus years. Outcomes is still this concept that's very difficult for me to wrap my head around, because I grew up in this system where it was all about step by step learning processes. How many times did you give hand over hand assistance, etc. So outcomes, this more global, broad philosophy of service delivery, is a harder concept to truly document. So making sure that you're looking at how you're documenting outcomes, making sure that you are communicating, you have a process by which you're communicating back to the team, not just at the time of team meetings, but anytime that there's a change in outcomes, there's a question about, are we really getting at what the person is important to or for them, or what they told us is important to and for them? And then also making sure that not only does your documentation include that required component of frequency and duration, but that they are accurate. So how are you reviewing that documentation to make sure that frequency matches what's in the plan, that duration matches what's in the plan, that ratios match what's in the plan? And how often are you reviewing that documentation just to read the little notes, right? Obviously, we know that if somebody's refusing a service, there should be some notation on the documentation about that refusal. Are we evaluating that? Are we using that information to help drive changes to the person's services? And then finally, billing accuracy. How are you ensuring compliance with EVV if you're an agency that somehow your staff have to utilize the EVV system? How are you ensuring that not only, but also that the actions that were taken meet the definition of the service that was billed? And so that a lot of that also is kind of a intertwining of documentation with billing review. Are you staying within allocated units? I think that's much easier for organizations and agencies to monitor. I think we see more struggle there with independent providers, but it's also important to you all to make sure, and to make sure that your direct support professionals know this is what we have available for this person. If you are getting to a point where they need more and we're not able to meet their needs with what's currently allocated, we have a process for which you can let us know that, so that we can then go back to that team and say, we don't have enough miles. There's been a change in condition for so and so, and now they have to go to the Cleveland Clinic more frequently than they used to, and it's really eating up their miles. So making sure again that everyone who's involved in that service delivery system understands the units that are available and how to provide services within those units. And then again, just to make sure that the accurate code and the accurate rate is being billed. Okay. All right, and then the final pillar, individual funds. And again, there is a requirement for a written policy for that, and that lives in 5123-207 of the Ohio Administrative Code. And we talked a little bit about it under, if you have a board of directors, making sure that that board of directors is familiar with the audits. Doesn't mean that you only should do audits if you have a board of directors. You need to make sure that you are regularly auditing your system of monitoring individual funds, especially if there's a rule about in the provide or in the personal funds rule, it talks about not commingling funds. And that is that is the personal funds with the operating funds of the agency. But many agencies, especially large agencies, will maintain a single account in which personal funds are all commingled, and that's not against the rule. You can have multiple individuals sharing an account where their personal funds are, and then allocate out of that account to each person. But if you are doing that, it is vitally important that you are auditing that account, probably more so than any other account, because you do have to keep track of things down to the detail of if that account is an interest bearing account. How do I allocate percentages of interest to each person based on what their account balance is? So if you are doing a commingled individual funds account, just make sure that you do have a very, very strong, robust system of auditing. You again have a system of auditing for all your accounts, but that's the one where my experience has been that there's often the most concern identified if you have those commingled individual accounts. Um, Sally has a question. Is there a rule about having annual audits done on all finances for the provider's business by a CPA or other financial firm? So 5123-207 requires regular audits. I don't know, and I'd have to actually pull that rule and read it to see how specific it gets into that. But Sally, that would be the place in which that would lie. Um, Oh, I'm sorry. I read that wrong. The provider's business, not the individual funds. So I think it's probably, and Haida jump in, I'm not familiar with a rule that specifies that for the business. It's the internal compliance rule that would really drive that, right? It's the internal compliance rule by which, let's say they come out and do a compliance review. Well, I'll just give you a true world experience. I had a situation, I had been at the department for maybe a year, so I was super green. And we had a situation where there was a large provider agency and there were some red flags based on a internal audit that they were doing. It was not something that they brought someone outside of the organization in, that just kind of indicated that, it doesn't really look like our finances are being managed right. And they had a chief financial officer. And so because of those red flags, they did reach out to their county. Their county happens to be a large county that has a very robust system of financial auditing. And so that's a service that that county makes available to their providers. And that county started an audit. And they found that the chief financial officer had embezzled over $1.2 million from the agency. It was an agency that was on a border county. So it was a county in which he actually lived in the neighboring state. And so he actually funneled 1.2 million from his agency into his bank account in another state. So at that point, the feds got involved because it was interstate commerce issues, and it became huge. But that's just an example of they thought they had everything covered because they were doing kind of an internal review, and they might have found these indicators of concern a lot more quickly if they had had, an outside source regularly auditing. But a lot of citations were issued, obviously, based on that situation. And so I guess I tell you that story in just saying that if the system of internal compliance had embedded within it, we are going to have annual audits done by this outside consultant, this outside CPA, and they still had this misappropriation and embezzlement. I don't think the provider would have gotten the citations that they got. So that's just my opinion. But I do think that if it's bedded in that internal compliance, not only will you find it quicker, but then I also think you're able to say, hey, we have a system in place. This is how we even found out this issue was going on. And I think that goes a long way in showing that you do your due diligence. So Linda
So I'll
shared.
just kind of
Nope.
mention in here a little bit. So Christy has put a few comments in here regarding if you're a non-for-profit, and definitely the best practice to have a financial review each year. And it, again, this is also, I know Sally, your question was specific to the business, and that's what we're also talking about. And then Christy also mentions, that for a nonprofit, the board is the fiduciary. So if something occurs like embezzlement, like Anne's speaking about, the attorney general will hold the board accountable if they didn't ensure solid financial policies. And so we're also speaking on that from experience, lived experience, in a sense. But that is definitely really important to think about. If you are a for-profit agency, of course, it would be best practice to have somebody looking in, making sure that all of those pieces and parts are working. So, kind of to Anne's point here on the slide, the rule that's listed, the 5123-207, is more specific to compliance around individuals' funds, but a lot of times those start kind of meshing together. The other little piece I
Yeah,
would
and as
add
we
in
talked
here.
about early. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. The other piece I would add in here is if your agency is acting as payee for individuals. And so if you're acting as payee, you're also going to be under the rules and regulations regarding under Social Security and the payeeship rules. And so again, the 5123-207 will kind of intertwine in payee concept, but it's not the oversight over payee. So you have to make sure you're following those rules as well. So there's lots of pieces and parts, especially when it comes to talking about funds. But I just wanted to kind of pull a few strings together on that one. So, Anne.
No, thank you, and thanks, Christy, for your feedback. Just again, if you kind of go back to that first couple of slides where it talks about what's required when there is a board of directors, that's exactly what Christy mentioned about for the nonprofits. That's really what that came from. So there is that specific requirement for agencies that are governed by a board of director, which is generally nonprofits, that they have those audits done. And then again, I would say best practice for everyone else is to embed that process into your system of internal compliance, what that looks like, and have someone externally, at least on an annual basis, take a look at your financials. Okay. Great. This is great dialogue. And thank you all for asking your questions and sharing what you're doing. Because I didn't say it yet, but Linda mentioned that they do an audit every 2 years. So that is their organization's policy. So and then again, back to specifically individual funds, making sure that your system addresses how you're going to manage those cash accounts, keeping in mind that cash accounts are not just checking and savings. It's also the cash on hand. It's also gift cards and food stamps, anything that has monetary value that belongs to the person. You should be able to see where the starting balance was and how it got to whatever the current balance is, either zero or the current balance. And there are also some templates that are available. If you can't find them online because the department is in the process of making some changes to their website, which includes removing current documents, and my understanding is they're going to replace them eventually. But you can request those from the department's compliance team, or I'm sure that probably Haida and folks at 19 Services also have those. So there are some templates that if you don't already have them, or if you'd like to look at something different, they can let you take a look at them. And then ensuring that you're avoiding conflicts of interest. Again, there's a lot of things in the individual funds rule, but this was a few of the things that don't always get talked about when we talk about individual funds. And so the rule prohibits borrowing from a person served, purchasing personal items from a person served, and selling items to a person served. And so, what I just want to clarify is that this absolutely does not mean that if a person works at a day program where they are creating art and the day program, sells that art to the public, that you can't buy a piece of art from the day program that the person that you supported has created. It just means that if I have a exercise bike at home and I never use it, this direct support professional can't just purchase that and give them $20 for it. Well, when the value is it's a $400 exercise bike, right? So that's really what it's getting at. So again, making sure that your agency policy kind of helps your DSPs understand those distinctions. And then same thing with like selling items to a person served. I can't think of any situation where a DSP should be selling anything to someone served, right? If that DSP is having a garage sale and other staff take them to the garage sale, and you're buying something for 10 cents, that's not ever been a situation where, that's been a red flag, right? But what it is my daughter sells Girl Scout cookies, and I can get, Sam, who I work with, to buy 8 boxes of Girl Scout cookies off of her because he loves Thin Mints, right? I would much rather see, in the intent of this rule really came from conversations internally about how can we help Sam engage in his community and go to the Girl Scout booth outside Walmart and meet new people and buy cookies from the girls at Walmart, right? We had a situation where we had a direct support professional who was an Avon representative, and it was a little bit odd when we walked in someone's room that she had literally the top drawer of her dresser was boxes and boxes and boxes of Avon jewelry that had never been opened, never been worn. And when you got to looking at that person's account, they were spending literally a couple $100s a month buying Avon from the direct support professional who was selling Avon. If that person had said to the reviewer, I love my Avon jewelry, I wear it all the time, then I think the conversation would have been, how do we connect this person with an Avon lady or an Avon man who doesn't work for your agency, right? It's not saying the person can't buy Avon or enjoying it. So those are just some real world examples that I've experienced in the past that I think are helpful as you think about how do we guide our staff when we talk about conflicts of interest. And then Christy shared something in here. She said with EBT and food stamps, you will want to ensure your agency is reconciling the transactions from the JFS statement. So you are able to get a official JFS statement through the local Jobs and Family Services. And so ensuring that you're utilizing that as a resource in your system of reconciliation. All right.
Yep, just wanted to say there, that comes from the compliance perspective, and even a couple of most recent compliance reviews we've been part of is if, and I put in the parentheses, if responsible, we understand not everybody carries that responsibility for each individual, but if there's a responsibility on the agency to reconcile the EBT we need to have that statement. And we can chat more about it later if you're not unsure how to get that or resources around it. We're happy to talk more.
Sally says they have a People's First group that is selling chocolate for a fundraiser. My staff wants to buy some. Absolutely. No individual specifically owns that chocolate. So really we're talking about buying personal property from a person that you support. If it is a general fundraiser, if it's being sold to the general public, if anybody can purchase and it doesn't belong, what's being sold doesn't belong specifically to a person, absolutely. All right. So the Department of Health and Human Services, their Office of the Inspector General at the federal level has put out some guidelines for internal compliance within the healthcare industry. And so a few years ago, we took a look at these and felt that these were really good guidelines to share with providers. So there are, I believe, 7 of them. So we're going to jump into these really quick. So the first one is a written standard of conduct, which is included in your policies and procedures. So that could be a general standard of conduct, or it could be this is what you do, or this is standard conduct for MUIs, and that's in your MUI policy. This is standard contact like conflict of interest around individual funds, and it's in your individual funds policy. So it doesn't have to be a separate written standard of conduct. It can be embedded within different policies and procedures. So what are some ways that your organization can address this? So ensuring that your policies are detailed and specific, but provided in a way that everyone can understand them, including DSPs, people served, and their families. Ensure that they're available in secondary languages. If you are serving someone whose primary language is not English, am I making this information available so that they or their family can understand what those policies and procedures are? Also, American Sign Language or videos. So if you could do it in a video that has closed captioning, if you could do it in a video where you have an ASL interpreter, so that you've got that and you can share that as you serve people. You may have a DSP. We're finding more and more DSPs that use American Sign Language, which is awesome because that's always been kind of a struggle. But these are also DSPs that not only know American Sign Language, they're part of the deaf community. And so making sure your policies and procedures are accessible to everyone, making sure you have a regular review and that you're updating your policies and procedures as rules, laws, or regulations change, or as your internal system of compliance has identified the need for a change. Shared process of policy development should include internal and external feedback. And as I talked about earlier, you're not just looking at policies and procedures that are required in rule, but also policies and procedures that are just best practice for your organization, based upon the individuality and uniqueness of the service delivery process that you have in place. Compliance program oversight. Every agency should have a person or a compliance officer or team who's responsible for managing your system of internal compliance. So whose responsibility is it to review your policies and procedures? If I'm a DSP and I want to share feedback or concerns or give an example of something really great that just happened, who do I share that with? Is there a centralized person who can get that information and then utilize that information to look at your system as a whole to either correct the issue or replicate that amazing thing that you got told about, right? The person or group responsible for this should report directly to your DOO or to the board of directors. So again, there is that communication channel that's occurring at the highest level of the organization. The person or group responsible should ensure that they produce and share monitoring and quality improvement reports. So this shouldn't just happen in a vacuum. There should be some outcome from the system, from what it is that your compliance officer or your compliance team is doing. The person or group should implement opportunities for feedback, making sure that there is a way for continuous feedback from all levels within the organization, and ensure that staff and customers know how to report compliance concerns, violations, or examples of quality. The person or group should investigate instances of policy violations and compliance issues and develop a plan of correction. Education and training programs. Training should begin prior to the provision of services. We all know that it's required in rule. The role of the employee should drive the type of training they get. So training should never just be a one size fits all. If I'm a direct support professional and the only thing I do is I'm part-time and I come in to help with community integration, then my training may look absolutely different than the training that a DSP who, is covering routine shifts in the home, doing, meal preparation and laundry and housekeeping. It may just look different. I still have to have the same required trainings, but when I get down to what the services are I provide and who I provide those services to, there should be some individuality built into that training. Um, your direct support professionals should have access to policies and notifications of trainings on policy changes. We're seeing a lot of organizations that are going to electronic bulletin boards or electronic notifications where direct support professionals can log in and look at policies and procedures and, communication boards and networking within their organization. And then also making sure that as you're developing your policies and procedures, that education and training opportunities includes a feedback loop that can drive those policies and procedures. So every time you're educating and training and you're getting feedback that, hey, you trained us on this, it didn't work, or man, you trained us on this and it was the greatest thing. I mean, it improved our efficiency, whatever. You're taking that feedback that you're getting from education and training and looping that into policies and procedures. Effective lines of communication. We are seeing, again, some of this is kind of built into improving organizational culture. So we all know the last 5-6 years, we've really seen challenges with staffing. Our workforce issues have been strong. Things are getting better, but it's been strong. And so organizations have been looking at how do we improve our culture? And one way to do that is effective lines of communication. Not only does that help identify areas of your processes and your systems that need to improve, but it also boosts morale. It gives people ownership in your agency when they're involved in directing the development of those policies and procedures, when they understand those policies and procedures and why we do what we do. Those are really good culture builders to help your organization and to help your direct support professionals. We're seeing the implementation of employee councils, consumer roundtables, regular feedback surveys, and employee recognition, all as ways to improve communication. Okay, next one. Auditing and monitoring. We've talked a lot about that. It should be continuous. It should be ongoing. It should be built upon your unique characterizations. And it should be part of everyone's role. So in everyone's job description, there should be something that says, if you're a DSP assistant and you're 17 years old and you're coming in and just helping out, there should be something in there that says, and if you see a problem, here's what you do. That is your responsibility to make us aware of issues and problems. So I recommend that that's in all job descriptions. A system of consistent discipline. So discipline is not always a bad thing. So making sure that it's kind of like the MUI adage, right? Everybody, when you say MUI, it's like, oh no, we're going to get in trouble. They're going to file an MUI against me, right? When really the MUI system is built upon a philosophy of communicating concerns so that they can be addressed and that so that there can be a change that ensures the health and safety of the person. And so discipline within your organization, while there are times that it absolutely needs to be structured, punitive discipline, unfortunately, there's also this opportunity to use this in a way that helps the person improve, that helps the DSP learn more skills to become a better DSP, to improve your organization. I recently went through some training around what's called Just Culture. I encourage you, if you have time, to do a little bit of research on the Just Culture Initiative. And it's a framework for strengthening monitoring and compliance and an overall system in health in the healthcare field where safety, accuracy, and trust matter, and to create conditions where people feel empowered to share the truth, to share honesty, and to recognize their mistakes as a way of improving their work. So if you have an opportunity, certainly take a look at Just Culture. And I'm going to move quick. I thought an hour and a half would give us lots of time, but so let's talk about setting up your system. So plan how your system will include those 7 elements we just talked about. Also measure, make sure that your system that you're developing has a process in there for measuring outcomes, so that you are meeting those 7 elements. Sorry, pop up. Oh, that must be on your screen, Ida. Sorry about that. It popped up on my screen too. So, um, make sure that your system addresses how you're going to analyze what you're measuring. How do you use that data? Who's going to use that data? Who needs to have that data? How frequently are we going to pull that data? It doesn't make a lot of sense in a system of continuous quality improvement to measure just for the sake of measuring. If you're not going to analyze what you're measuring and the data that's coming out of those measurements, then you're never going to get to that improvement. And improvement really is based on the data that we've collected. How are we going to change our system? How are we going to, again, either modify our system to get better, or how are we going to replicate and engage people to do those things that we've identified that are, and quality initiatives and really forward thinking things that have come to our attention. And then repeat. What is your timeline for this continuous quality improvement process? Obviously, we want it to be ongoing, but for those formal parts of it, measuring, analyzing, implementing change, what does that look like? Is it at least quarterly? Is it monthly? Is it annually? But for your organization, what does that look like? Okay, next one. So when you have a system of quality, continuous quality improvement, it allows you to build habits that will result in better review experiences. So again, when you self-identify and self-correct, you're going to most likely have a better regulatory review experience. It helps to build organizational stability. So again, you have those pillars upon which, or the foundation upon which the pillars are standing, and then you have that roof, which is that ongoing oversight and monitoring, and that creates organizational stability. So not only are you stable because you're having good compliance outcomes, you're not going into a sanction or having negative outcomes, you also are having generally better feedback from your customers, which helps create stability because within our field through free choice of provider, many times families and individuals are choosing their provider based on what they hear about them, based upon feedback from others. So again, this allows you to build that stability through continuous feedback, continuous improvement. Better outcomes again, I can't emphasize enough that it's not just better outcomes for the people you support, which are vitally important, but it's also better outcomes for your staff. And then that leads to hopefully increased staff retention and morale. I hope what you're seeing is that continuous quality improvement, internal compliance really is just one more vital part of your overall organizational culture. Go ahead. Positive outcomes also include reducing risk for the provider. We talked about the stability, stronger partner relationships. So when you as an organization are reaching out to the county board, the COG, your consulting organizations, other professionals that you engage with, and getting their feedback, they feel heard, they feel valued, and it builds these stronger partner relationships, which then has a positive impact on the services they deliver for the people that you support. And it creates a proactive culture where people do feel comfortable in bringing concerns to your organizational leadership in a way to proactively address areas of noncompliance, areas of concern around health and safety, or just areas of concern about the way we do business and how we treat, our staff and the people that we support and our external partners. So those are just kind of those side advantages that comes to having a good system. So Mary Kay Rizzolo, who is the president and CEO of CQL, left or shared this quote, and I wanted to share it with you all. I won't take the time to read it. You can obviously read it yourself. But it's just really important to understand that your role as a provider is truly at the intersection of quality, not just again for the people you support and their families, but quality as an organization, your reputation, your relationship with your employees, your relationship with your external partners, with the department, and your regulatory oversight entities. So having a system that helps you ensure, enhance, and build quality has so many positive outcomes that go beyond your service delivery. Okay. So we have about 10 minutes. I was hoping for at least 15. So I'll try to do better on my time management next time. But again, we want to just open this for comments, questions. If any of you have a system in place that you're like, we do something really cool and, you're willing to share that so that others can, potentially look into replicating these positive outcomes that you're driving through your system. We just want to open the floor to all of you.
I don't always do real well with silence, so y'all are welcome to join in whenever. I know we're running tight on time. One thing I just wanted to mention that kind of goes back to the beginning of the presentation when Anne was speaking about local rules and laws. I'll just give you a kind of hard to type this out as a tidbit. So just a little tidbit there. I'm sure that both Anne and I have some very interesting real life experiences that fall under that situation. But if you're looking at the agency provider compliance rules, we get asked this question a lot about kind of those random things that Anne was mentioning. So like whether it's about your zoning or about your building or about a fire inspection or some of these other things that it doesn't always draw right back to a DODD rule. However, there is a rule and it's also in your tool under question 5.018, which is the agency provider following all local rules and laws? So I'm bringing that up here as a point to kind of say that catch-all question, if you will, could result in how it would play into your provider compliance review. So one of those random examples could be if there is an outstanding zoning issue. We've seen situations where something has gone to the next level. So, maybe between the landlord or the owner of the property, there's some issues and it's been brought up, taken to the city or to the local government entity, and that entity has then issued a warning or a timeline in which to fix that issue. And if that continues to go forward, that's how that can then start kind of tying into the DD side of it of we still have to follow our local rules and laws. And so that very vague kind of draw in there, but I just want to at least kind of bring that out so it can kind of put your eyes on that question in the compliance tool. And then if you have, questions or thoughts of how that might apply, we're more than happy to answer more, even outside of this call. Um, Yes, we're about at 6 minutes here. If you guys don't have any more questions or thoughts, first, thanks for all of the great conversation in the chat, and we really appreciate your input. And please, feel free to reach out. We have our 19 Services Facebook page. We've got the YouTube channel. There's ways to get a hold of us. Looks like my email address on here, the Ann's, we can put Ann's on here as well for when we send out these notes. But please reach out, with questions or if you have topics or ideas for, our next sessions. I think we're looking at, Ann, do you want to mention what our topic is for May?
Yeah, we're going to be talking a little bit about with our agency providers. We're going to talk about documentation, but we're really going to talk about it from the perspective of helping your DSPs understand how documentation drives billing. And then, obviously, billing drives, financial stability of the organization. So it won't be a traditional, like, oh, this is how you document, this is what all the elements are. It'll be more that conversation to help you have a conversation with your DSPs so they understand why they do what they do. And a lot of times from DSPs, we hear, man, we just documentation takes up so much time. We don't understand why we have to spend so much time doing this. So we hope that we can help you be prepared with some resources and information to help have that conversation with your direct support professionals. And we are open to other topics. So feel free. Again, you can email us. I'm not sure why I didn't put my email on the slide. I apologize for that. I put it in chat. So you can reach out to me. You can reach out to Haida. You can also comment or share on our Network 19 Facebook page, which is a great place for networking and finding resources. So yeah, if you have something that comes up and you're like, man, I wish we could talk about this on our next session, please feel free to let us know. Okay.
Awesome. Well, yay. Thank you all so much for your comments, and we're excited to see you as well next month. So we're gonna go ahead and hop off here and we will see you guys all again soon.
Thanks,
Thanks.
everyone. Bye bye.